Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Meet the Employer. I'm Rosa, your host. Today there's a little twist because we're actually meeting two expert recruiters from TPP Recruitment. So I'll be introducing you to Hannah and Tracey, but first of all, I want to welcome Kate and Nicola, who are doing our BSL and are captioning today. So thank you very much for joining us. So this is a part of a series that we do record. We make it accessible for all. So it will be housed on our fabulous Hive, which is a 24/7 website that allows you to go and access information with regards to the world of work. So it will be recorded, but you will not be. Just myself, Hannah, and Tracey will be recorded. We really want you to be as interactive today. Please share those stories with us because after all, we are talking about how to deconstruct or decode that job application, right? And how to write a killer application. So please do engage with us. Feel free to share your experiences on the chat box. But we will also have the Q&A open as well at the end should you want to ask any questions at that point. Just wanted to do a quick check-in, making sure that the captions is working. All good, we're ready to go, fantastic. Okay, so what I'd like to do is introduce TPP Recruitment, and it is a specialist recruitment agency that is UK-wide, and their areas of expertise is in charitable, education, healthcare, professional membership, award bodies, cultural, and we have Hannah and Tracey today. So what I thought I'd like to do is, Hannah, I would like you to introduce yourself, your role, what you do at TPP and why you're here today, and then we'll move on to Tracey if that's okay.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Hannah. I am a senior consultant at TPP and I work on the education and training team. So I recruit mainly for awarding bodies and some membership bodies, permanent roles and temporary roles, right through from kind of entry level to director level. So anything to do with kind of assessments, exams, quality assurance, apprenticeships, everything like that. I'm here today to share some tips about CVs and application processes and how to kind of navigate those and understand kind of what's expected of you and how to best do those applications.
Fantastic. Hannah, we really look forward to your wisdom and your insights today. And remember, guys, you can share your experiences on the chat box. If you've got any questions throughout the PowerPoint today, please feel free to ask those, but there will be the opportunity at the end. Tracey, could you please introduce yourself, your role, why you're here today, and then we'll get started.
Sure, thank you. It's great to have been invited to join you all today. So I'm Tracey and I am the Chief Operating Officer at TPP. I'm actually celebrating my 20-year anniversary this week. So it's been a long time, and I started life as a recruitment consultant at TPP. So predominantly I've joined today to be able to share with you what we've learned over the years and insights that we've gathered and tips and advice that we have on being able to kind of decode those job adverts and really make sense of it and qualify whether it is a role worth applying for, etc. And hopefully we'll be able to share some of those sort of things with you today. And as Hannah said, go on to kind of giving you advice around putting an application forward that will hopefully be a successful one.
Okay, thank you, Tracey. We often get quite a lot of feedback from our candidates here at Evenbreak, just deconstructing that job application, that job spec. It's a minefield, right? For a lot of our candidates, it can be really daunting and overwhelming. I know that you're going to kick off with a PowerPoint, so I'll let you get started. And as I said, we really look forward to your insights and what you have to tell us today.
Great. So the title of this slide is it's called What Will We Cover Today? It's just to give you some insight into what you can expect us to cover. So we'll tell you a little bit about TPP recruitment, although Rosa's done a brilliant job of that already. We'll give you some insights into what we are seeing employers are doing at the moment, job boards, etc. Just to get some clarity around who is advertising, whether the role is with an organisation or potentially being advertised by an agency. Some qualifying questions for you to consider whether you should apply for a role. We'll go through some of those. And then Hannah will tell us a little bit more about hard, soft, and transferable skills, just to be able to make a clearer distinction between what those are and when they may be relevant for you to reference. Then we'll cover some application types and methods and a brief summary at the end. The title of this slide is TPP Divisions. So as Rosa said, TPP is a non-profit specialist consultancy. On this slide, I have covered the divisions, so the job functional areas that TPP recruit for. I'm not going to run through that now just for the sake of time, but you will have access to these slides post this webinar. There's quite a lot of content in the slides today. That's quite deliberate from my perspective. I wanted to leave you with as much context to the advice that we are giving you in order for you to be able to go back and reference some of these things as a checklist. And I've also hyperlinked to various other resources that hopefully you will find quite useful to go back to. So the slide in front of us now, the title is Our Vision and D&I Statement. So TPP has a vision of changing lives and that of others through purposeful work whilst exceeding recruitment standards. We pride ourselves on taking an ethical approach to recruitment, and we welcome all job seekers to register with TPP, to consider our job vacancies, and to have conversations with our consultants around suitability of anything that they might see that is of interest. And then you will see our diversity and inclusion statement. I will highlight just the first bullet point there. TPP believes that all people have the potential to secure and retain fulfilling work. That is really important to us. And we very much focus on ensuring that when we have job applicants approach TPP, we look not just at whether they're suitable for a job, but whether that role could potentially be a longer term career as well. So the slide in front of you, you will see all sorts of logos that we are extremely proud of at TPP. The first one is the Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative Awards, and TPP was awarded, was shortlisted as a finalist this year for the category of Inclusive Recruiter of the Year, which we are obviously very proud of. We look forward to the ceremony in December and hope for a positive outcome. We are also signed up to the Show the Salary campaign. This means that all our own vacancies at TPP, as well as those of organizations that we represent, will have a salary displayed. That will be either a salary or a salary range. And that's a commitment that we stand by. We've recently this year become a flexified accredited employer, which I will touch on further in the presentation, so I won't explain that in detail now. We're very pleased to have adopted ReciteMe technology to make our resources and our jobs more accessible to all job seekers, and we are members of Inclusive Employers. So the title of this slide is Encouraging Signs. And here I'd just like to tell you a little bit about what we've seen employers are doing, job boards, etc. Just to give you, from my perspective, a bit of positive hope, I suppose, that we are seeing things shifting in the right direction, albeit that there is a lot of progress that still needs to be made in terms of employers and their responsibility towards being more inclusive. We are seeing positive signs. So some of that is, we can see that there's more of an awareness of barriers that are faced by, for example, the disabled population, but various other underrepresented populations as well. Clients are more readily offering alternatives to traditional application methods, to supporting statements or cover letters, which we'll touch on a bit further on in the presentation as well. They are taking our advice on things like role design and removing desirable criteria from job descriptions. I'm not suggesting that they're all doing this or that it's an easy process, but we are much more readily engaging with organizations on the topic of why they should be doing this. And that for us is extremely encouraging and should be for you too. They are considering transferable skills and looking at potential, being more open to looking at whether people have potential to develop that skill and experience, as opposed to always having an expectation that it is existing already. And they are providing things like prepared interview questions ahead of the interview, which is very welcome from our perspective. Considering skills required for the role versus skills required to interview well. So we all know that an interview is quite a nerve-wracking situation to be in, not the most natural of environments to find yourself in. And often you can be judged in an interview on how you've performed in terms of presenting or thinking on your feet and answering. And really, what we are encouraging organizations to do, and they seem to be more receptive to, is trying to find ways in that interview process to actually test the skills that are required for the actual role. And in our recent TPP salary survey, we had 64% of the employers, bearing in mind our specialist population or our clients being non-profits, they reported that they've updated their D&I strategy in the last 6 months. I'm almost certain, had we asked this question 2 or 3 years ago, that would not be, the percentage would not be as high as it is. And that is an encouraging sign. It means that it's on the agenda in the boardroom and people are paying attention to it, which is good. So on this slide, the title, Job Boards and Platforms. So what are they doing? Some of the things that we've seen, I've listed here. LinkedIn, for example, you may be aware of this already, but if you aren't, I thought it was worth mentioning. So they have a disability answer desk at LinkedIn. If you have any issues with bugs on the system or the accessibility software that you are using, you can contact them directly for support. They've also launched a free app called Be My Eyes, and they've got volunteers who will offer visual assistance via a live video call. So, you know, from my perspective, I thought those were good signs. I've got a meeting with our LinkedIn director next week, and he very much wants to talk to me in this meeting around what LinkedIn are doing from an accessibility perspective. So I say watch this space. I think there's a lot of exciting things to come. We've found that some job boards have got built-in gender decoders now, which is great. It makes it easier for us when we're posting jobs and employers. Some job boards have essential criteria questions, which again just help that process of really qualifying what is really essential for this role. There is more options to sort of select flexible working options. So, for example, it could be job share options or part-time options. It's not just the normal kind of, it's a full-time role or part-time role. There are other flexible options coming to the fore now. A lot more prevalence of specialist D&I job boards like Evenbreak, and there are various others as well. And we've really seen an increase in clients asking us about utilizing these specialist job boards. So that's another encouraging sign. And then coming on to Flexa, I'm not sure if anyone's aware of this, but this is a platform that showcases genuinely flexible employers. So if you haven't checked them out, I would definitely suggest that you do. These organizations and employers are externally verified by Flexa as genuinely flexible, and they actually survey the staff within those organizations to really verify whether what the organization is saying about their flexible policies is in fact correct. So I would encourage you to have a look at those organizations. Agencies and consultancies. So I think generally there is an increased awareness. The REC and APSCO, which is our governing body, so to speak, they launched their very first D&I survey in the recruitment industry this year. So that is a really encouraging sign. There's more sort of awareness of that. We are also seeing, that more agencies are taking that advising and educating piece with employers, which is absolutely key. And there's no time better than now for agencies to be looking at diverse candidate pools. It is a candidate short market, believe it or not. And now's the time to be thinking about where else we can access talent for our clients. And then, of course, agencies are key with supporting job seekers throughout the process as well. So this slide title is Who is Advertising and Application Methods. So typically you would see direct employers advertising their vacancies, or you would see agencies representing those employers and advertising on their behalf. I think I mentioned this just because I think sometimes it can happen quite easily that you apply for a role and your expectation was that you were applying directly to the employer, and then you get a call from a recruitment consultant going, thanks for your application. So I think it's worth just spending a little bit of time on establishing whether you are making an application directly to an employer or whether you are making an application via an agency, because the process could be slightly different, which we will touch on as well. The various application methods I have noted to the right of this slide. The three that we are going to focus on today is the CV only, so looking at the CV and getting the best from your CV. We are going to be looking at the CV, cover letter and supporting statement, and then we'll be looking at application forms and the portal. Or a portal. There are various others, like just having your LinkedIn profile or directly going to an employer with a speculative approach, not off of a job, or a CV and set questions. But we felt by focusing on those three application types, it will put you in a good position for most other applications that you may be considering. Okay, so this title is The Advert, Should I Apply? And I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about some sort of qualifying questions that you could potentially ask yourself just to establish whether, in the first instance, it will be worth applying for this role. So the first point I've made there, and is a very important one, is to really sort of consider that job titles vary a lot from one organization to another. Officer level position in one organization can be quite a junior position, and then in another organization could be a very senior position. I would always suggest that as well as looking at the job title, you consider the salary, which could be a good indicator, but more importantly, looking at the duties and responsibilities of that role. If, for example, it says line management of one person or line management of multiple departments, it will give you an indication potentially of the suitability and the seniority of that role. Does the role fit with your current career aspirations or needs? I think that's a key question that you need to ask yourself. Is it paying the required salary or rate that you are looking for? Is it in the right location, or does the advert indicate flexibility? What I would say is, from a flexibility perspective, I would not be put off if a role doesn't indicate that it can be you could work from home or that there's any form of flexibility. I would probably still apply despite there being a fixed location. And that is because we all know what COVID's done. It's made, it's shifted the world of work to a much more remote way of working. And I feel that many employers have been, enlightened over this in the recent months and would potentially be much more open to considering that. So please don't discount yourself on the basis of a role not indicating flexibility, although it's a great sign if it does. When you read the advert, does it leave you feeling excited? And I think, it's safe to say excitement can come from so many different things. But if it's simply just an exciting feeling because there's a prospect of a job, that's enough to apply. So, don't always feel that it's got to be this dream job that ticks all these boxes. Everyone has different career aspirations and have different needs for wanting to work. So if you're excited, even remotely, then that is a good sign. Do you have the required experience or qualifications? So that is obviously a key question in this process. And I go on to focus here a little bit around primary responsibilities and duties. I think it's important to say at this stage, and I do say it at the end there, you should put more emphasis on the essential criteria rather than the desirable. I think that is something that we should really think about. But there's no getting away from, if a role has got primary responsibilities and the duties sort of indicated there, that the person shortlisting for that role, the hiring manager or the recruiter, will want to see evidence in that. So ask yourself, have you done this before? And if you have done it before, did you complete those tasks successfully? Did you get positive, praise from your line manager? Did you have evidence that you did that really well? And what's really important, did you actually enjoy doing the work? Question. It may be that you did the job, you did it really well, you got a lot of positive praise, but you really didn't enjoy what you were doing. So those are some key questions that you can ask yourself to really think about those duties and responsibilities that are highlighted. do you have some of the required hard, soft, and transferable skills? And Hannah is going to talk a little bit about this in a moment. But I think what I would say is, look at the essential criteria, establish which of those are hard or soft, and absolutely address those criteria in your, satisfy yourself that you do meet those criteria, shall I say. The transferable skills is where you could put a little bit of thought into how you could potentially identify a skill that isn't exactly what that employer is after, but will strongly demonstrate your ability to do that regardless. And as I say, Hannah's going to touch on this a little bit. Then ask yourself the question, are you confident in your ability to learn and adapt if supported? And I stress this, if supported, and I do go on to this later, but it's a good time to mention, at any stage of the job application process, right from the point of first seeing that job advert to the onboarding and beyond, but let's stop there for now. I think you need to know that you can ask at any stage whether you need any adjustments, any adaptations, any support, or if you just simply have questions to get clarity on certain things. And we will touch on this a little bit more later. Putting emphasis on essential criteria and less on the desirable. What I will also say, there's evidence to suggest that job descriptions and adverts, they tend to list the most important things first. So it is a little bit sweeping, but I would say that it's likely the things that are listed first are probably what the person shortlisting is wanting to see most evidence of and sort of have highlighted to them. So that doesn't mean you ignore everything at the end. And obviously in job adverts, you can assume that they've extracted the most important elements of a much lengthier job description into the advert. So I just think that's something to consider. Focusing on the first things that I mentioned is probably a good place to start. I'm going to get Hannah to do the next slide for you all.
Thanks, Tracy. So we're going to look a little bit more at sort of hard, soft and transferable skills. So the hard skills that we sort of talk about are generally sort of gained through work. That can be through paid work or unpaid work and education. So there'll be sort of specific skills that you've learned either in your work experience, during training or through a qualification. They're normally measurable and they're often displayed through technical knowledge and commonly linked to particular jobs or professions. So you might have a specific accounting qualification, you might be very good at data management, you might speak German, you might be good at copywriting, you might have great customer service skills, or you might have had a lot of experience of data entry. So they're things that you can kind of quantify, you can prove them, and you've generally sort of got experience or a qualification sort of with them. Then the soft skills are more around your personality traits and habits that are more innate and unique to us as individuals. So there's a whole array of kind of soft skills and throughout your life, not necessarily just in work, you'll have probably identified things that you're particularly good at, and those will be more your soft skills. They're obviously less measurable than hard skills, and they do often relate to how we interact with other people. So things like your people skills. Examples of soft skills could be things like empathy, teamwork, adaptability, and confidence. And always useful just to try and work out, some of your soft skills and the things that you're particularly good at and enjoy kind of using within the workplace. And then the transferable skills, the one that Tracy mentioned, that are, often a bit more difficult to identify. They're things that they're sort of general skills that are applicable to a variety of jobs and not unique to one specific job or vocation. So they're a bit more interchangeable and flexible, and they're things that you might have picked up within one job or sort of volunteering job, that you can take with you to another job, and they'll still be useful even though it might be within a sort of different sector or field. So that could be things like negotiation skills, it could be numeracy skills, could be problem solving skills, listening skills, leadership skills, or resilience. I know that it's not always easy to kind of think about transferable skills, but often if you kind of look through a job description and think, maybe I haven't done that exactly, but I've done sort of this similar thing somewhere else, that can be useful to sort of note down and as a good transferable skill that you can sort of sell yourself on. Oh, I can't hear you, Rosa.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you now.
Okay, I may have had my mute on, so my apologies. It's interesting, I'm just looking at the chat box and some conversations coming through, and we've asked the question, does everyone feel comfortable knowing how to identify and share those transferable skills? We've had one individual saying, no, not sure. What would be your tip as a recruiter to help our candidates be able to understand how to identify those transferable skills? What do you say to your candidates when you're helping them, when they're looking to get that interview with your employer?
Yeah, so I think it's about really looking through the role that you're applying for, the job description that you're applying for, and thinking, you know, have I done this in a different capacity, or have I done something that's very similar that will still be useful in this role? And then trying to frame that in a way that it makes it very obvious it's a transferable skill. So, for example, if a job description asked for, I don't know, a specific database that you might have used, and you think, well, I haven't used that, but I've used a slightly different database that, you know, maybe you look it up and it's quite similar, you know, saying something like, have used this database previously, and, you know, I can pick new systems up very quickly, or something like that. It just proves that, you know, you might have done something slightly different, but you feel confident enough that you'll be able to sort of bring that with you and adapt it to this role and to this job description.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, just in response to that, Rosa, I also think it's a very useful thing to do with someone else, where I've seen sort of, you know, I suppose light bulb moments sometimes is when you might sit down with your partner or with a friend or with a coach or something, and just sort of talk through your previous experience, and often it takes someone else to kind of go, but that's exactly what you've done in this job, and it kind of, through that conversation, through that exploration, which is what recruitment consultants often can really benefit the process, you know, of doing, is to kind of tease out those transferable skills a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, there is also, I guess, one other thing that I often tell candidates to do, which could be useful in this instance too, which is to have almost like a working draft of your CV. So it might be pages and pages and pages, and it might have every single job you've ever done, and it might have, you know, so many bullet points for each job, but to list exactly what you do in each role. Because I think, you know, if you think about a job that you might have done 5 or 6 years ago, you might not remember every single little thing that you did. At least if you've got that working draft, you can look through it and you can think, okay, those 4 bullet points from that role are going to be the most relevant and the most transferable for this one. So you can take them sort of from your working draft and put it in your application for that specific role. And I just think it's a good way to sort of keep track of all of the skills that you've picked up during your employment, and use it to sort of tailor your CV going forwards.
Like having that foundational CV with everything on it, and then you're pulling, almost like it's like a deck of cards, you're pulling those specific skills or transferable skills, whether it's hard or soft, to suit that specific job application, right?
Yeah, exactly. So no one else will ever see that CV. It will just sit, you know, on your computer somewhere, and it's just for you to refer back to. But I think it's a very useful way to keep track of those skills, and just to sort of jog your memory even as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And it's actually really great, guys. Tracey and Hannah are actually saying that, you know, they're there not just to support the employer get the most qualified candidate or job seeker, but they're there also to support you. They, you know, they want you to thrive and be successful. And so, you know, please reach out to your recruitment consultants, because they are there to give you that support and that information in how to, you know, amplify your CV, right, Hannah?
Yeah, exactly. We're always here to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the title of this slide is Further Considerations to Help You Decode and Qualify the Suitability of the Employer and the Role. And I stress here, it is as much about qualifying the employer as it is the role. So it's one thing knowing that you can do a role and that you potentially are suitable for it. It's another thing sort of being able to establish whether that employer is going to be the right employer, the right environment for you to actually do that role within. So there are a few questions that we've come up with, or considerations that will help you do that level of qualifying as well. So is there some evidence that the organization is an inclusive employer or agency? If not, don't automatically opt out or make negative assumptions. I've touched on this a little bit before. It's similar to looking at an advert and seeing, do they have any indication of flexibility? I think it is much more prevalent now for you to see evidence of flexible employers or inclusive employers, and Evenbreak's a really good example of a platform that really showcases employers that are genuinely inclusive. But I think, it's safe to say that a lot of organizations aren't at the same point in their journey and potentially haven't got around to, dare I say, updating their website with, information or graphics and things that really give that sense of inclusion. So I wouldn't just automatically opt out at that stage. Does the organization's values, mission and vision appeal to you? And I think this is really crucial, aligning your own values. Hannah does pick up on this in later on in the presentation, but aligning your own values with that of the organization and getting that across in your application is often a really simple but effective way of standing out. Do your research, LinkedIn, looking at our ex-employees or current employees. Google Glassdoor reviews are good indicators and basis for research. Consider whether you know anyone who's worked there in the past or works there currently. Are you comfortable with the language and the tone that is used? So, for example, does the advert read as quite gender biased, for example? I think when it comes to tone, it's also worth considering whether the language and the tone potentially could be coming across as quite informal and playful. That could indicate that the environment and the organization is potentially a little bit more laid back, a little bit more relaxed, a bit more informal. Whereas if you see a job advert or job description that's quite written in quite a formal style and the use of language is quite formal, it may be an indication that it's a slightly more sort of corporate environment or, rigid environment potentially. But you can never look at these things in isolation and draw conclusions. I would always say that is a good indicator, but look at the bigger picture and consider, all the information you have at your disposal. And then don't be put off by acronyms and, jargon that is used. I think, sadly, we're probably quite a far way off seeing job descriptions that totally exclude acronyms and jargon. I think, what I would probably say is, good old Google is a good place to start with those things, just to get a bit of clarity. Don't ever hesitate in contacting the recruiter or the organization and saying, can you please explain what this is, if you can't find out, or ask friends or colleagues or people in that industry. That might help a little bit.
Great. Just wanted to say there is Charles. Thank you, Charles, for coming online and chatting with us. Charles is based in Ireland. Now, I know that obviously TPP recruitment, you're global, right? So you'll have opportunities not just in the UK.
Sorry, Rosa, sorry to interrupt you. You're crackling quite a bit and I can't quite hear you.
Okay, let me just try this. So I'm switching my microphone off and on. Can you all hear me okay now?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, apologies on that. What I was saying was, Tracey, we have Charles who's on chat, and he's an Irish job seeker. So I know that your offices are global, right? And you'll have opportunities not just in the UK, but globally.
Not global. I would say we are more UK based. Okay. We occasionally have organisations that we've worked with in Ireland, but I'd say the majority of the organisations are usually within sort of England, Wales, Scotland. So yes, I don't want to sort of suggest that we would have a lot of opportunity in that area.
My apologies. Charles, you can reach out to the careers team here at Evenbreak if you feel that you would like some support. Okay, Tracey.
Okay. So don't be put off by wordy, long, unrealistic job adverts or job titles. There's a phenomenon called job creep or job creeping. And this is something that we see a lot of at TPP in terms of job descriptions, where a role has over the years evolved and taken on its own life based on who's been in that role, what additional duties they've done, and sometimes even sort of more personal traits that have come with people that have worked within those roles. generally speaking, it means that that role is kind of gone outside of scope, really. And we work with organizations to really kind of think about that, and that's why we talk about role design, etc., so that they can go back to basics and sort of not have these unrealistic expectations of what they're recruiting for. So I think it's always worth bearing in mind that phenomenon does exist, and not letting it put you off at the early stage of that, and sort of spending a little bit of more time teasing out, again, those essential criteria, the really important elements from that, and sort of, blocking out the other bits that potentially have crept in over the years. There can be an expectation for job seekers to read between the lines, or organizations can make assumptions about what people might already know about that organization or the role. I think this is really one of the pain points that people do come across. If you look at working independently, that phrase is quite generically used, it's quite broad. It can have all sorts of connotations attached to it. It could mean that you will be working on projects or tasks where you are quite independent and you don't work in a bigger team. But it could also potentially mean that the organization is under-resourced in terms of line management, and that they expect you to just get on with it on your own. So those are two quite scarily different outcomes. Unfortunately, in certain situations, there is some information you just won't be privy to, even if you ask. So I think at that stage, if you want specific clarity, you need to reach out and ask, and sort of avoid making assumptions that potentially could put you off of a role where it really shouldn't. Just looking at good communication as an example, I think one of the things that you could potentially do here, where you've got these sort of vague descriptions of words or traits or whatever, is that you, rather than sort of getting too detailed or too bogged down with what exactly do they mean by good communication, is take it back to yourself. Think about how do you feel about communication? How do you describe your communication is good? What evidence do you have of being a good communicator? And when you put yourself forward for that role, you go on, you use that, you kind of showcase your ability to communicate well. And that could be through saying, I've got good communication skills because I greet and meet people at reception daily, or I've got good communication skills because I have presented to my team, or I've trained my team on something. So don't worry too much about what do they mean by this, or is it I think try and sort of go back to yourself and use it as an opportunity to really stand out from the crowd. Use the cover letter to describe and highlight your key strengths relative to those vague open-ended traits. And that's what I was just talking about now, sort of using that opportunity to take that good communication and injecting it into your cover letter, and sort of impressing them with how you've interpreted that. And Hannah will touch on that as well in her section. Some information and explanations you simply won't get, unfortunately. I think where it's really complex or ambiguous, just get someone to give you some help and support, and consider their thoughts on your suitability as you go through that process with someone else. And then, is your online presence consistent with your CV and experience? Is it professional? We would always encourage job seekers to do that cross-check before they apply. Okay, if needed, contact the organization or agency for more information. I've stressed this already, but I will stress it again. Throughout the whole process, right from the start, if there are any adaptations or sort of accommodations, adjustments that you need, don't hesitate to ask. Organizations have a legal obligation to do that, number one, but also it demonstrates that you are taking sort of ownership of what it is you need in order to be successful for that role. And I think, you'd probably be quite pleasantly surprised at the willingness of organizations to make sometimes very small adjustments that make a huge difference to your ability to really put forward a strong application. I've hyperlinked there to a job tracker that we have. I think being organized with your job search is key, and it helps you not feel overwhelmed by the process. So using a job tracker, putting in, the names of the organizations, the contacts that you've been in contact with, so that when you get that phone call to say you've got an interview, you can quite easily track and stay on top of and come across as professional. Consider whether you have holidays or any other reasons why you may not be available to see the process through. And then disclosure. I think this is a point that is, personal to every individual. I think what I would suggest is sort of really considering whether disclosing a disability or a health condition or whatever that might be is relevant at that stage in the process. I think it's very hard for any recruiter or organization to be prescriptive about when the best time is to make a disclosure. I think you need to consider at what stage it will help you to make that disclosure and when you feel most comfortable doing that. What I would say, thinking of it from the perspective of a recruitment consultancy, we can only work with the information that we are privy to and that we have, and we can't sort of help and offer support if we aren't aware ourselves. So I would encourage you to be open as open as you can be and comfortable with when you are working with recruiters, to be able to help them help you with whatever support or questions, and be that go in between the organization and yourself. It really can sort of facilitate that quite considerably. And if you need support, adjustments, resources, as I've said, just ask, be clear, be open, and more importantly, be really confident with your request. And hopefully you will get a positive response. So I'm going to hand over to the lovely Hannah now, who's going to talk through the application types we mentioned earlier on.
Thanks, Tracey. So as Tracey said, we're going to be covering sort of the key application methods that most organisations use, and sort of how to determine what that application will be, and what that involves for you, and how to sort of make it an easier process for you. So probably one of the most common types of application is just your CV. So it will say something like, to apply, please send your CV here, or there'll be an apply button that will just have sort of one space for your CV. So this is where I think it's particularly important to adapt your CV to that specific role. So things like that draft CV that I spoke about will really help you with that. I know sometimes if you're applying to a lot of roles, it can be sort of impossible to adapt your CV to every single one of those roles, in which case I would say when a role particularly excites you and it's something that you would really like to get, it ticks all your boxes, then those are the roles where you want to spend the most time adapting your CV to that job description. Make sure that you're contextualizing your experience to the current job market. So, a lot of us are working remotely at the moment, and the end to that doesn't seem to be in sight. So if you have worked remotely before, make sure that you mention that. It sort of shows your ability to work independently, but also to adapt to different working styles. And make sure that you state the obvious. Organizations aren't going to just assume things, so make sure that it's on your CV. If you can use Zoom or Teams, make sure that you say that. If you have been onboarded remotely before, make sure you say that, because they're not just going to assume those things, and they're important things to have on your CV. So how I would suggest that you sort of lay out your CV is that you start with your personal details, so things like your name, your phone number, email address, and then have a short personal statement. This only needs to be a few lines long, just gives the employer kind of a quick overview of you as a person, and yeah, just needs to be sort of a few lines. It can be a couple of paragraphs, just a little something at the top of your CV. I would then go through your education, your qualifications, and then any sort of systems or IT experience that you've got. So whether that's, again, don't assume that they'll just know that you can use those sorts of things. So whether it's Office, whether it's particular databases, whether it's video software, IT systems, CRM systems, things like that, you can list all of that there. And then you go into your work history. So you want to structure this in almost kind of reverse chronological order. So start with your most recent role or your current role, and then go back from there. And as I said, kind of have a few bullet points for each, depending on how relevant it is to the role that you're applying for. If you've had any volunteering experience, then definitely include that. You can either include it within your career bit, but make sure that it's clear it's volunteering, or if you want to include it in a separate section, you can do that at the end. And then this is optional, but if you want to have a short section at the end on your interests or your hobbies, then obviously make sure to do that. In terms of kind of helpful tips for your CV, you need to make sure that the spelling and grammar is all kind of accurate and correct. So make sure that you proofread it. If you've got someone else who can proofread it for you, then that's great. As I said, you know, if you're signed up to an agency, then ask them if they could just have a quick look through it. We can't change your CV for you, but we can kind of go through it with you, make recommendations for any changes, and then you can do that yourself. Make sure that the language that you use throughout your CV is consistent. So if you want to use third person, you can. If you want to use first person, you can, but you need to make sure that you use sort of I words all throughout, or no I. It doesn't make sense to have both. Make sure that you're using verbs and credit the work or tasks that you did to yourself. So take real responsibility and ownership for the tasks that you did. You know, you want to kind of get across to the employer how much you actually did within the role, and the responsibilities that you had. Make sure that the headings are clear and that the spacing is good. You don't want too much white space, but you need to have sort of enough. We would always recommend using Microsoft Word. It's just the program that's the most compatible with the most computers and that the most organizations kind of use. You want your font and your size to be kind of eligible and to be legible even, and professional. And I would always recommend having a focus on your sort of outcomes and achievements. So, you know, not just saying, I did this, but actually I did this and it resulted in this success. So, you know, not just, you know, delivered training, but delivered training to 40 people and, you know, had great feedback, or helps them go on to do whatever the training was meant to do. You don't need to include your referee details on your CV unless it specifically asks for it. Definitely don't include photos of yourself, and don't include sort of too personal information like your marital status, your date of birth, your religion, children. It's not important. It's not relevant to your job search, and we would just advise against using things like that. We would always aim for the CV to be around 2 to 3 pages. I wouldn't worry too much about this. If you've had a very long career, then obviously you want to include the relevant detail, but try not to include sort of irrelevant details and try and stick to that 3 pages. And then I would say to consider the sort of search engine optimization of your CV. A lot of companies are now using kind of artificial intelligence and programs to sort of do that first read through your CV. So you want to make sure, as I said, that the things that they'll be looking for are in your CV, and make sure that those programs are going to pick up on them. If you do want a CV template, we've linked one here that you can use. So if you want to have a quick look at that and then sort of adapt it to yourself, then feel free. So the next sort of popular application type is where you'll also include a covering letter or a supporting statement. This will normally be alongside your CV, so it will be sort of supplementary. The covering letter and the supporting statement, they are similar, but they're a little bit different. So if an employer asks for a covering letter, it is usually a longer sort of supporting statement, and so you can approach them in the same way. They might sometimes be specific about exactly what they're looking for, but if they're not, sometimes it can be difficult. So I'll sort of talk through a sort of general template, but obviously if they say what specifically what they want you to include, then focus on that first before going through this. So I guess the main purpose of a covering letter or supporting statement is to quickly convince the reader, so normally the hiring manager or the HR department, that you are what they're looking for, and to make you stand out from the crowd. So you want it to be kind of very obvious that it's for this role, and, you know, almost convince them that you are the right person to interview for the role. So we would always say to open with a short introduction about yourself and what it is about the role and the organisation you're interested in. There's nothing worse than reading a covering letter and it having nothing relevant to the role or the organisation. That almost looks worse than just not doing a covering letter. So if it's just a couple of sentences about what it is that the organisation sort of means to you, why you're attracted to either the organisation or the role or both, but just make sure that you specifically mention kind of the company's name and the job title and things like that, and actually sort of come up with a reason why you are applying. It's a great opportunity to expand on your skill set or highlight your skill set, to talk about your experience, your transferable skills and your potential. So this is a great place, sort of once you've identified your transferable skills, to almost explain to them why they are transferable skills, where you've kind of picked them up, how sort of strong you are with them, and why you think they'll be relevant to this role. Because, you know, on your CV, you've got sort of just limited space, whereas here, obviously you have limited space, but it's in addition to your CV, so you can go into a little bit more detail. Don't just repeat the information that's on your CV. You know, they will have your CV too, so make sure that if you want to use some of the same information, that's fine, but make sure that you're expanding on it. And if you do have sort of extra things that you can think about, then this is the place to include them. And as I said before, just make sure that you're tailoring it to that role. You know, don't just have a covering letter that you sort of send out with your CV for every role, because it doesn't look professional. And more often than not, people will just discard those because it's not sort of relevant to the role. Make sure, so what I would suggest doing with a covering letter is sort of having the job description up with the person specification and almost going through each bullet point on the person specification and address that. Doesn't need to be in its own paragraph, but you know, if the first point is, I don't know, experience of customer service, then that's the first thing that you'd start with. You talk about, you know, your customer service skills, how good they are, where you've picked them up from, you know, why you enjoy doing that and things like that. And include competency examples. So as I said, not just talking about what you did, but actually talking about your successes with it and the outcomes and things like that. Make sure that you're giving evidence and any facts or figures if they're relevant. And then I would close the covering letter with another sort of sentence or two sentences, just sort of reaffirming your interest and enthusiasm for the role. You know, sometimes you can say something like, thank you for taking the time to review my application and look forward to hopefully, you know, getting the chance to interview, something like that. Some helpful tips in terms of the covering letter. This is a great place where you can sort of highlight how your own values align with the organisation's and give examples. So where Tracey said earlier, you know, if there is a role where you feel that your values are really closely aligned with the company's, then this is definitely the place that you should talk about it. It shows that you've researched the company very well, but it also sort of shows them why they should interview you, because if your values align, then they're going to be interested in sort of speaking to you. Make sure that your contact details are on both the covering letter and your CV, so that they can get in touch with you. And make sure that your personality and your enthusiasm for the role come across in the covering letter. You know, you want to come across as a really positive person, and make sure that you don't sort of include negative comments or make assumptions about yourself and your suitability, because you're not trying to bring yourself down. You're trying to highlight actually all your successes, and as I said, sort of convince them that you are the person for this role. And again, with your covering letter, make sure that you proofread it and ask someone else to review it for you if you can, just to make sure that it reads properly and that there's no sort of spelling mistakes or anything like that within the letter. The final application process that we're going to talk about is application forms. These come in a sort of variety of formats. Sometimes there'll be forms that you sort of download off the internet, fill out yourself and send back to them. Sometimes it will be an online form. If you do need an alternative format, or if you've got any concerns about the form or the portal, please just get in touch with the organisation and discuss alternative options. More often than not, they either have alternative options sort of ready to go, or they can sort of come up with an alternative option. So don't feel that if you can't fill out the form, that sort of discludes you from applying for the job, because they will want you to apply, so they'll find an alternative way. Make sure that you give yourself enough time to fill out the form. Sometimes they can take a little while. So, you know, note down the deadline and make sure you've got plenty of time before then. I would also say don't wait until the deadline to sort of apply for a role, whatever format it's in, because sometimes companies will close the job earlier if they get a lot of applications. So, you know, as soon as you've got time to do the application, then get that done and send it off. And then with the forms, I'd say, you know, have a look through it, make sure you understand exactly what you need to do, have a practice go at it or complete a rough draft, and then sort of edit that to your final copy. And make sure that you're reading and following the instructions carefully. So, you know, if it asks for specific things, make sure that you're giving them the information that they need, and it sort of follows the format that they've asked for. You can always ask someone else to help you review the instructions or explain them more clearly. And again, as I said, if you need the organisation to do that, then I'm sure they'd be more than happy to. I would always say that it's probably better to submit the form in an electronic format. Obviously, if you do want to kind of handwrite or anything like that, I'm sure they can accommodate that, but it's probably better to do it online. And if there are any questions on the application form that sort of don't apply to you, they're not relevant, or you don't have an answer, you can just put NA. You don't need to sort of make up an answer that doesn't quite make sense to the question. And then again, if they ask for your career history on the application form, it will be sort of listing your job starting with the most recent, unless they're stating otherwise. You want to make sure that the application is in line with your CV, but you don't need to sort of copy and paste. If it's an application form instead of a CV, then you can do that. But if it's going to be alongside your CV, then you don't need to copy and paste. Make sure again that you're relating your experience and skills to the essential criteria on the person specification. And there will often be a section on the form for a personal or supporting statement. You can use the same steps that I covered within the covering letter and supporting statement section. Sometimes there'll be a word limit on this, so just make sure that you're sticking within that. And when you're reading a question, think about whether that question is closed or open. So if it's a closed question, it's going to require a very sort of clear and specific answer. So sometimes it might be yes or no. Sometimes it might be one specific example of something you've done previously. Whereas if it's an open question, they're more sort of asking for your interpretation of the question. They're asking for your sort of thoughts on it, and you can go into a bit more detail. As I said, if there's a word limit either for any of the questions or in total, then just make sure that you're sticking to that. Proofread the application and ask someone else to review it for you. And I'd also say just to keep copies of all of your application forms saved, because if there is an issue, maybe the format isn't quite right for them to open, or it goes missing or something like that, it means you've got it at hand. I find it quite useful to label it, probably call it the company name and then application form, and you might even want to include the month that you sort of submitted it, so that you can go back and access those really quickly. And it also means if you're invited to interview, you can see exactly what you've said in your application form. It's a good indicator probably that they liked what you said in your application form, and you can kind of expand on that at interview stage. And then any more sort of tips that you want on the application forms, there's a hyperlink here just for you to have a bit more of a look. So in summary, we would always suggest that you consider the role carefully before applying, but don't be put off prematurely. We've given you some sort of steps and tips for all the different application methods for you to follow, and don't hesitate in asking for more information, for support, for alternatives or adjustments. I know, as Tracey said, it's a very personal decision and a personal choice. Just because you're asking for adjustments doesn't necessarily mean you need to disclose everything sort of at that stage. It's okay to ask for adjustments, and most organisations will be more than happy to give them. Utilise support from family, from friends, colleagues, and any other support services. So Evenbreak, their Career Hive, the National Autistic Society. I think Tracey also has a link to a website on the National Autistic Society that we can share with you if you would like some more details. And then I think just identifying sort of trusted job finding services or agencies, identifying organisations that you feel particularly comfortable sort of applying for and working for, and that you'd be particularly keen to, and keeping an eye on those websites.
Fantastic. This is stacked full of really insightful information, and we really appreciate your wisdom today, ladies. Thank you. This is so thorough. And I also just want to share some thanks from our candidates today. They certainly have found value just having a look through the chat box. They really appreciated all the links that you've even provided for further insight and information. So you have it here, guys, from two expert recruiters who are really sharing their insights and tips on how you can create that killer application. Having a little look at our Q&As. Does anybody have any questions before we finish up? We've got about a minute or two left. Perfect timing. Hannah, that was just timed to absolute perfection. If anyone's got any questions, now is your time to ask. Okay, just for Hannah and Tracey, the sort of things that are coming through the chat box was, that whole area of should or shouldn't I share or disclose my disability at interview stage? It's interesting seeing some people's comments. Some people sort of feel that no, because they're concerned about prejudice. But certainly what you've shown us today is that there is goodwill and there is willing from employers who will make those accommodations and adjustments.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as I said, it's got to be a personal choice. It's got to be whatever you feel comfortable with. And I understand, you know, if you haven't had great experiences in the past with employers, you're going to be very hesitant to disclose anything. I mean, as Tracey said, as an agency, you know, we find it very useful. And I think, you know, on the whole, candidates are quite comfortable telling us because we make it very clear that, you know, we're only there to help them with their job search. And it does mean that we can make adjustments in our processes, but also talk to our clients about making adjustments in their processes and how that's feasible for them and how they can make adjustments either at application stage or interview stage, and even with the sort of onboarding. But I think, you know, the bottom line is that there shouldn't be any prejudice sort of within companies, and if there is, you know, you need to think about whether that's a company that you'd even want to work for, because if they're going to discriminate at interview stage or application stage, you know, how is that going to affect you working there, and what kind of culture are they going to have within their organization? So, you know, it's got to be up to you, but I think that the more that you feel comfortable disclosing, the more that they can help you, and hopefully the better the outcome will be.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Hannah. Thank you so much. It doesn't seem that we have any other questions. We were answering those sort of in the chat box as we were going along. I would just like to say, Tracey and Hannah, thank you so much for your time and your commitment and the fabulous and very valuable insights that you have delivered here today. Just for everyone, we will be making the PowerPoint available on the Hive in PDF and normal format, and there will be a recording as well. So thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you at the next Meet the Employer session. Tracey and Hannah, thank you again.
Thank you,
so
Rosa.
much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.